Riots in the capital, tribal clashes in the Highlands, and now a looming fuel shortage that has the whole country on edge. Papua New Guinea has seen what feels like a year's worth of crises in just the first 2 months of 2024. Where does the country go from here? I'm Shannon Tiezzi, editor-in-chief of the Diplomat, and this is Behind the News. I'm happy to be joined today by Douveri Henao, the CEO and founder of Legacy Group, which is a geopolitical consulting firm based in Papua New Guinea. And he's going to help explain the situation in PNG and what might come next. Douveri, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure, Shannon.
I want to start with the tribal clashes in Inha province, which left over 50 people dead. And this has caused significant concerns, including overseas, that we might see continued violence in the Highlands going forward. Is this something that the world should be worried about?
I think it's something everybody should be worried about. The loss of life generally is a horrible thing, especially a conflict such as this that's been protracted for several years. The fundamental reasons why these sorts of tragedies occur is obviously in the realm of disputes. But that underlies the complexity of Papua New Guinea. Dispute resolution mechanisms vary from across the nation. We're normally touted with the phenomenon of 850 languages, but those languages also bring an entire array of thousands and thousands of cultural protocols and norms. It also identifies contour lines of boundaries, practices. So that singular hegemony that you normally see on state values prevailing right across the country, that's an afterthought. The real fundamental base of identity in the country is through those clans and tribal lines. So where they do have peace and where they do live in harmony, you don't see those disputes materializing. But where there have been disputes, and in some cases they've been intergenerational disputes, and those tools that keep those conflicts in a manner that doesn't escalate or go kinetic. But if they do go kinetic, then they do have that capacity to create the sort of violence that we saw.
Now, unfortunately, this is not the first episode of deadly violence in PNG this year. There was rioting and looting in Port Moresby back in January that resulted in a number of deaths. You mentioned inter-clan disputes were the root cause of the violence in Inha, but what was the spark for the January violence, and how has the government done in addressing those underlying causes?
So there are some parallels that you can observe from the incidents, the horrific incidents in Enga, and also what transpired in the Jan 10 riots, and that is we are undergoing in this country a deeply accelerated transformation of values, if I could use that word, where systems and norms that hold us in clans and communities are now rapidly becoming transactional, monetized, which is obviously a figure of national and economic development. When those values do shift, and if there's not a lot of us that are on that journey of shifting, it creates those vacuums of, like anywhere in the world, where jobs are scarce, resources are scarce, and then that's where the tension exists. So January 10 was symptomatic of that. When the glitches, as they've been referred to, occurred in the payroll system, and I think it's also important for readers to understand that 80% of the Papua New Guinea market is the PNG government. So when you have that sort of problem occurring to 80% of the market. 80% of the market's going to react in the way that it happened. But what's important to observe, Shannon, was the riots targeted retail shops where there was food. The riots targeted products for basic services. They completely left other retailers, albeit I should probably say opportunistic. They did raid some mobile phone shops, but that in itself indicates, number one, that there is this economic depravity connected to what happened in January 10. And a similar observation that I've heard from frontliners and folks that have been working in Enga for a while, that there's a large body of young people that simply have been promised opportunities by the political patronage. They've been promised opportunities by business head patronage. And when those promises don't materialize, when they don't have the opportunities to walk into changes, this is where a body of young men literally walk around the countryside looking for opportunity, and they have a tribal identity looking for it, and then they clash with other tribal young people. So this is where there is some juxtaposition. You can see that the challenges that we saw in Jan 10 and the horrific incidents that we saw in Enga, it has this economic undertone of opportunity for young people.
Yeah, unfortunately, it looks like the economic aspect of things might actually get worse in the coming days. Puma Energy, the major fuel supplier, has said that there are no more fuel supplies in PNG. How do you think this is going to play out on top of the already existing unemployment? You mentioned economic depravity, and now we have a fuel crisis added into the mix.
Yeah, so these are some of the growing pains I think any country has experienced in its history. We in the 90s and the 2000s were on a localization, industrialization push. So the predecessor prior to Puma's acquisition of Interoil was this refining facility to try and domesticate production of our oil resources. And those provisions of giving monopolistic and pricing systems have largely caught up to us. But at the same time, we haven't been able to attract a diversity of retail fuel suppliers. So Puma's infrastructure is quite well advanced in terms of Jet A1 fuel supply, compared to Total and Mobil, ExxonMobil, and others in the market that haven't had that level of infrastructure development. So when it comes to fuel supply, it's largely a supply chain delivery issue on one major player, Puma, that has this in right across the country compared to the others. But we are seeing Exxon and Total scale up their supply to offset those fuel shortages. The problem is also quite interesting as a case study. What originally started as a foreign exchange challenge to pay the suppliers of the fuel, it's now moved into a fairly liberal interpretation of our anti-money laundering laws and our counter-terrorism laws, where the largest bank, Bank South Pacific, is not, or is in the process of closing Puma's account because of its parent company, Triage, has several AML, CTF related challenges to its counterpart bank. So here we have a situation where the largest bank that has foreign exchange reserves is turfing out the largest fuel retail supplier. So some of these issues are actually structural in nature. Now, to get to your question, the social economic impacts of it, absolutely. The infrastructure that Puma has that caters over 50% of the market. So there is this mad rush. Just the other day I had to queue up to fill up my truck at the Puma service stations. But is this going to impact this economic awakening challenge that we've had since the beginning of the year? Absolutely. But again, I come back to this point that the market is correcting itself through Total and Exxon lifting their game, but it's going to take a fair bit of negotiations between the trilaterals between Bank South Pacific and the transitioning of those accounts with Puma and the belief of the supply, and fundamentally the government of Papua New Guinea through the Bank of Papua New Guinea, and potentially now that it's becoming a national security concern, we may see some dynamics around those sorts of conversations as well. But it is a fairly challenging time in PNG, given those legacy problems that are now coming back to us with great vengeance.
Mm-hmm. Now, amid this challenging time, PNG's opposition attempted to put forward a no confidence vote against Prime Minister James Marape. The motion was rejected on procedural grounds, as I understand it, and now Parliament has adjourned until May. So is this the end of this political battle? The opposition has said, there might be street protests if you don't let our motion have its fair say in Parliament. They're trying to challenge it in court. How do you see the political fight between the opposition and Marape playing out going forward?
So probably to answer that question, just to unpack it in three tracks. The first one is political stability and what's transpired again the beginning of the year. So number one, the ruling party, Pangu Party, led by James Marape, that is an institutional party that's was there since the birth of our country. So there's a lot of history, there's a lot of identity, there's a lot of patronage that's and prestige that sits in that party base. Now, I have spoken on several occasions with PM Marape. He's very focused on institutional building. His absolute passion is a government that is functional, but also a government that's quite large, and so he sits in that spectrum of politics where processes, government intervention, government active player, being an active player is critical. So based on that drive, there are three things that he's done which indicates about his power projection. It indicates his direction in wanting to instill that institutional strengthening building space. His speech in the Australian Parliament was a direct signal not only to the Australian public but also to Papua New Guinea that he is a Pacific statesman. He is the leader that Papua New Guinea has been praying for. He is the leader that's able to go to a middle power and tell them that we're serious about our ability to have economic independence. That was his clear message that he prevailed. Now that resonated with his party, but also his coalition partners, that the charisma that he carries, this is the person that needs to be in the prime ministerial seat. When he came back from Canberra, his party convened a convention. Now, what was interesting about this was a leadership challenge was in the making of whether he should remain as the party leader. And he, towards the end of the deliberations of that convention, he came out emphatically as the leader of the 57 members of parliament. Now, this is a very, very unique approach. It's probably standard operating procedures in Western democracies and others, but in Papua New Guinea, to have those sorts of systematic institutionally operating these sorts of norms is highly different, because what normally happens is a political party is really there as a club. It's not an actual institution. So that gave him confidence to move into parliament. And again, as a demonstration of his strength, a constitutional amendment requiring 82 votes, which was largely symbolic, declaring Papua New Guinea as a Christian nation, that went through without any hurdle. 82 members supported that. And by testing the numbers on the floor, he cheekishly, his whip then passed a motion of confidence to James Marape, which again, the whole 82 reaffirmed that he is the prime minister of the day. Now, that vote of confidence has no constitutional reference, but that indicates, at least in the near term, that he does have the solidarity of 82 members of parliament, his coalition partners. Watchers like myself, the first indicator we see of dismantling a government, it largely works within the party system. So the leadership, once they start moving away, drifting into the middle benches to the opposition, you know that there is a dismantling accelerating. Now, conversely, the alternate prime minister, Alan Bird, and his 30 members did consolidate the necessary numbers to put a motion of vote of no confidence to the Speaker and through the Government Business Committee. The Government Business Committee, again, because of the 82 that Marape holds, that's largely a coalition grouping of supporters of Marape. So those procedural errors that they identify, it's not by any way means different from what other prime ministers have done with the solid numbers that they have. So the adjournment and the rejection of that motion on government business, on parliamentary business, it is part of the play that happens in ensuring stability. There are various Supreme Court references indicating whether there has been procedural irregularity. What the courts would normally do in these instances is look at the administrative process rather than making a direct decision compelling parliament to rescind. It's very rare that the judiciary gets into another arm of government's process. And so on the outset, it does seem that Marape has oxygen, at least to breathe his government, at least for the year, I'm assuming. But the onus is really on the alternate government to dismantle the coalition and get those numbers drifting across to their side of the house. And that remains to be seen in any real direct form. What we're seeing, resignation of coalition members, are minor parties. No one from James's party has actually made that cross. when we do see that, then those are the signals that we know that there is trouble brewing in the Pangu camp.
Thank you very much, Douveri. As I'm sure everyone is aware, having watched this is a very complicated situation with a lot of moving parts, but I really appreciate you giving us an overview in the brief time that we had, and some things to watch for moving forward when it comes to Marape's government. So thank you. Thank you for joining us at home. Please subscribe if you would like to see more videos like this, and I hope to see you next time on Behind the News.